This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
This podcast is part of E2C Network, where we share the whole Auburn experience.
Hello and welcome to War Horses, the only college equestrian podcast that has finished setting up his office with some sound insulation. I'm your host, Auburn Elvis. Let's talk about some college equestrian. So in our last episode, we did a recap of each team's fall season, and I'll go ahead and sort of do that again as we take a look at the official Auburn Elvis College Equestrian Rankings. We're going to do the dual discipline teams first. Number 1 is Auburn. They finished the fall 6-1. They're number 1 in the nation in both sets of rankings. And I think the Tigers are going to have a pretty good spring. I think they're going to win a bunch of meets, basically right up until that final weekend when they go on the road out to Texas. They're probably going to drop those 2 games at the very end before we get into the conference season. But I think there's a really good chance that Auburn's going to be tied atop the SEC standings with Texas A&M and Georgia, and that Auburn will probably have the tiebreaker win over Texas A&M, certainly over Georgia. So, yeah, that's what I expect to happen for Auburn here in the spring. The number 2 team in my rankings is Texas A&M. Right now, the Aggies are 5-2. They're going to have a spring that's pretty much the same as what their fall was. They had a really good fall. They're probably going to have a really good spring. They're probably going to finish things off by beating Auburn at home. And depending on margin of victory, we'll see if they finish first in the SEC or second. But I'm pretty sure they're going to be either first or second. Number 3 is TCU. The Horned Frogs are 5-3 going into the spring season, and they had a really good fall. They did drop some meets here, but all of them were expected, that you would expect them to lose. And I think the spring is probably going to be about the same for them. They'll win most of the meets you expect. Some of those road meets, they might drop 1 or 2, so that's pretty good for them. I think they're going to finish first in the standings going into the Big 12 tournament. So, yeah, good season going for them so far. And then the number 4 team in my rankings, they're not 4th in the NCEAs, but they'll be shooting up the rankings here in the spring because, is SMU. I didn't tell you the team. It's the Mustangs. SMU did not have a great fall. They're 3-4 right now. That's why the NCAA has a bunch of teams ahead of them. But I'm telling you, the Mustangs probably aren't going to lose another meet here in the spring. They're probably going to go undefeated. Now, they don't have a conference. They're independent. So once they go undefeated, they're going to be at whatever level they are. And they might still get jumped by a team from the Big 12 or the SEC because those teams have conference seasons, or conference tournaments rather. And, they could get some impressive wins and jump ahead of SMU. But I think SMU is probably going to end up finished about 2nd or 3rd overall when everything's said and done. Number 5 in my rankings is Georgia. The Bulldogs had a really good, pretty good fall. 5-2. I mean, that's real good. The Georgia, I expect that their spring is going to be a lot harder for them. I think they're going to pick up a couple more losses here in the spring. They're probably still going to stay tied in the standings with Texas A&M and Auburn, like I mentioned, but their margin of victory is not very good, so they're almost certainly going to finish 3rd in the SEC standings if they end up tied with Auburn and Texas A&M. The number 6 team is Oklahoma State.
Yeehaw!
The Cowgirls are at 5-3 right now. They've won most of the games you would expect and lost games you would expect. They did drop a home meet to Auburn, but overall they're looking good. And they're a strong team that they're probably going to finish the regular season number 2 in the Big 12. But when they get to the conference season, or to the conference tournament rather, we've seen them upset TCU in the conference tournament before. They might be able to do it again this year. The number 7 team in my rankings is Fresno State. Now, the Bulldogs, They're 4-3, but this is actually pretty good. They really improved from last season, so they had a pretty good fall. I think their spring's going to be about the same, so they're probably going to finish as the third team in the Big 12. Not sure how they'll do in the conference tournament. I mean, if they get hot, they might get an upset, but yeah, we'll see how that goes. The number 8 team in my rankings is UT Martin. The Skyhawks look to be the best team in the ECAC. They're 4-3 right now. Pretty good for them. They're probably going to have a spring that's about the same record. They'll beat the teams you expect, and they'll lose to the teams you expect. So, yeah, that's how they'll do. And then, really, for them, they've got to do well in the ECAC tournament. If they end up winning that thing, which I think they can, then, yeah, they'll probably end up going to Ocala, which would be a great achievement for them. I don't think they've been yet. The number 9 team in my rankings is Baylor. Now, the Bears are 1-3. They didn't have a great schedule. It was pretty tough. They're going to get a lot more meets here in the spring, so we'll really get a better idea of how good they are. There's a chance they could jump UT Martin and get into the top 8. I don't know. I mean, we'll see. There's a chance, but basically it's going to come down to how well they do in the Big 12. If they can get some upsets and then do really well in the Big 12 tournament, then Baylor's still in the conversation for getting to Ocala. But if they don't do well in the tournament, they'll probably be staying home. But we'll see how that goes. The number 10 team in my ranking is South Carolina. The Gamecocks are 2-3, and, their fall wasn't great. This is a rebuilding year for them. The spring is probably going to be more of the same. Not enthusiastic that the Gamecocks are going to make it to Ocala this year. I just don't think it's in the cards for them. So those are our top 10 teams in the dual discipline. Now let's take a look at the single discipline and do a quick rankings rundown with some recapping of how the fall went for these teams. The number 1 team in the nation is Dartmouth. The Green are 4-0, and, their schedule was decent. It wasn't quite as challenging as it has been in past years. That's part of why I think they're undefeated. We really won't get to see them challenged much more in the spring either, so they're probably going to finish undefeated. And, yeah, once they get to Ocala, we'll see how it goes for them, who they match up against. But, they deserve to be number 1, but I'm not sure they are the best team, but they definitely have the best record, so yeah, Dartmouth is number 1. The number 2 team in my rankings is Sweetbriar. The Vixens are 2-2, and it's pretty close between them and Lynchburg. Both of these teams have kind of lost games you thought, well, maybe they shouldn't have lost those. But overall, I think Sweetbriar is a little bit better than Lynchburg. But again, I think both those teams are probably going to make it to Ocala. I think Sweetbriar's spring is going to be about what the fall was. They're going to win the games they expect. You expect them to, and they're going to lose the ones you thought they wouldn't win. So, yeah, Sweetbriar's number 2. Number 3 team is Lynchburg. Now, at least in my rankings. Lynchburg is 4-2. They started off number 1, but then they had that big upset loss, and then they lost again. So because of that, that's basically why they're below Sweetbriar, because I remember all of these, whereas the rankings people over at the NCEA, they forget about stuff that they conveniently want to. Anyway, Lynchburg's your number 3 team. For a while there, it looked like they were having some real problems, but they've gotten a lot better at the end of the fall. I expect they'll continue to do well in the spring, and we'll see how it goes once conference tournament season comes around for them, but they're strong. I think they'll end up in the top 4, and of course the NCAA loves them, so yeah, there's no way they're not going to be in the top 4. I'll just go ahead and tell you, yeah, the NCAA voters are going to make sure that Lynchburg is in the darn tournament. So anyway, spoiler. Number 4 is Charleston. The Cougars are 2-3 in the fall, and yeah, they had a really good fall, or at least it started out really well. They pulled off a big upset over Lynchburg. I think they got another win, but then they started losing, and they've been floundering a little bit. They won, I think, near the end there, but anyway, yeah, they need to recapture some of that magic that they had at the very beginning of the fall, and they'll have a few chances to do that here in the spring. We'll see how it goes, but yeah, depending on how things go in the conference tournament season, I think Charleston has a really good shot of making it to Ocala. And I think Charleston is actually hosting their conference tournament, so that's always a plus. All right, so those are the top 4. Here are the teams that still have some work to do if they want to make it into those top 4 to get to Ocala. Number 5 in my ranking is Sacred Heart. The NCEA rankings really like the Pioneers in the preseason. Took Sacred Heart a while to get going. They didn't have as many meets. They only had 3 meets. They're 1-3 or 1-2 right now. They had a decent fall. You kind of the losses they had, you kind of could see coming. We'll see how their spring goes. If they do really well and then do well in their conference tournament, they might make it to Ocala. So they're still in the mix. Number 6 is Centenary.
It's a twister. It's a twister.
The Cyclones are 2-3, and they had a pretty good fall. I mean, they got the 2 wins there. That's pretty good. We'll see how they do in the spring. Again, their chances of making it to Ocala are not great, but if they get hot at tournament time, who knows? The number 7 team is Swanee. Now, the Tigers' fall was up and down. They won some meets you didn't expect them to, and then they lost some meets you didn't expect them to. So, not sure what we're going to get out of the Tigers here in the spring. But right now, they need to do a lot of work if they want to make it to Ocala. They're going to have a really good spring, plus they're going to have a really good postseason in the conference tournament level, and then they're going to have to get a little lucky with some teams above them losing. So, yeah, Swanee went last year to Ocala. I don't think they're going to go this year, but it's possible. It's a long shot. The number 8 team, Bridgewater. The Eagles are 2-3. They actually had a pretty good fall considering their history. You know, they won 2 meets. They're looking good depending on who they play. And, that's probably what the spring is going to be like for them as well. Don't hold out a lot of hope that the Eagles are going to make it to Ocala this year, but that's not their goal. Their goal right now should really just be to keep improving, and this is a building year for them, and the program's going in the right direction for them. So, we're not talking about them going to Ocala this year, but who knows? We might be talking about them going to Ocala next year. We'll see. The number 9 team is Berry. Now, the Vikings, it took a long time before they got going. They've lost all of theirs. They're 0-3. So not a great fall, but even in their losses, mostly they were competitive. So that's what you want. But here in the spring, you're hoping maybe they get a little bit more than competitive. Hopefully they could get a win from somebody. We'll see. Don't hold out a lot of hope that they're going to make it to Ocala. But again, they're such a new program that for them, the goal is really just getting established, continuing to improve, and we can see that there's some improvement going on. And once they do that, who knows what the future's going to hold for them. All right, so those are our rankings. That's how the situation looks from the fall. I also gave you some kind of projections of what I think they're going to do in the spring. But let's get specific, because coming up this weekend, we have some actual action, some meets on the schedule. So let's take a look at our meet previews. So we've got a bunch of meets out in California, and the first one to look at is Delaware State at Fresno State. I think the Bulldogs are going to win this one. We're not really sure with any of these if they're going to be 4-on-4 or 5-on-5. It's probably going to be a lot of 4-on-4s. But anyway, I expect Fresno State is going to win this by about 4 or 5 points. So Delaware State will get their points, but I think the Bulldogs, being at home, I think they're going to win this one. The next meet is Minnesota Crookston at Fresno State. Now, in this one, I think it's going to be even more one-sided. Minnesota Crookston made some improvements in the fall this year, but they're still a good couple of steps behind Fresno State. So I think the Bulldogs are going to win this one by at least 10 points. And, it should be a big win for them. But I think Crookston could get a couple of points from them on the road, which would be exciting for them. The next meet to look at is Delaware State at UC Davis. So the Hornets are going to go down the road the next day to UC Davis, and this one should be kind of close. I have the Hornets ranked a little bit higher in my rankings than I do with UC Davis, but I think being at home is going to give the Aggies a boost, and I think they're going to win this one by about 1 or 2 points. But if Delaware State gets hot, they could get the upset, and that would be a very nice road victory for them, regardless of how they had done against Fresno State the day before. Another meet we want to look at is Delaware State versus Minnesota Crookston. So here over at Davis, they're going to ride a neutral site meet for them. Now, the Hornets have more firepower than Minnesota Crookston. Again, Crookston is improving, but it's probably a tall ask for them to beat Delaware State. So I think it's going to be about a 12-point win for Delaware State. And then our last meet of the weekend is Minnesota Crookston at UC Davis. So in this one, I think the Aggies are going to basically do the same sort of thing that Delaware State did to the Golden Eagles. And I think UC Davis is going to win this one by about 10 points, maybe more. That is all of the meets coming up this weekend. So next week we'll have recaps of everything, and we'll have more, previews of more stuff. So we're getting into the spring season here. Yeah, this is exciting. It's good to be back. I hope everyone had a good break. But now, we're on the home stretch now. Everything is heading towards the, the finish line, getting to Ocala. So every meet really matters at this point. And I'll be right there with you, bringing you all the action, all the recaps, and all of my rankings, which obviously are better than the NCEA's, but we already talked about that. So anyway, that is all for this week's show. I am your host, Auburn Elvis. I thank you very much for listening, and war horses.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode on the E2C Network. On your way out, I want to remind you to stop by e2cnetwork.com. It's your one-stop shop for all our content across our podcast, YouTube channel, and much more. To stay up to date with us, make sure you're following social media accounts such as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. While our content here may always be Auburn sports heavy, if it's orange and blue, it's what we do. War Eagle.